I stood on the porch with my suitcase in one hand and my raincoat clinging to my arms, soaked through at the shoulders. The porch light had already gone off. Kurt must have switched it off when he slammed the door. It wasn't cold, but I felt it in my bones anyway. Not from the weather, from the weight of what had just happened. 73 years old, 2 children, 4 grandchildren, and a pension that had never been late. And still, somehow, I'd ended up standing outside my daughter's house, in the rain, holding everything I owned in 2 suitcases. It started with a sentence, one I didn't expect, even from him. "We're short on rent, Helen. You live here. Time you started paying, or you can leave." It wasn't a request, and it wasn't Janine who said it. It was Kurt, her husband of 8 years, sitting in his stained sweatshirt on my late husband's favorite chair, as if it had always belonged to him. I didn't answer at first. I thought maybe he was joking. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe it was just one of those sentences that slips out when a man feels powerless, unemployed, embarrassed. But he was serious, and Janine didn't say a word. I suppose I should have seen it coming. For weeks, things had been building. Hushed conversations when I entered the room. Kurt snapping at the kids. Janine rubbing her temples every time I asked what was wrong. But nothing prepares you for your own child standing beside a man who just threatened to throw you out, and choosing not to say a word in your defense. I said no. Not loudly. Not even with anger. I just said, "No, Kurt. I'm not giving you my pension." I think I surprised him with how calm I was. Maybe he expected me to cry or plead or soften. But I'd spent most of my adult life softening myself for others, smoothing out my opinions, stepping back, making things easier. That part of me was tired, worn thin. An hour later, when I returned from the pharmacy, my bags were already packed, sitting right by the front door, lined up neatly as if I were a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. No one answered when I knocked. I stood there, in the drizzle, hand still raised. I could hear the television inside, cartoons probably for the twins. But no one came. The bags weren't heavy. I've never been one to collect clutter. A few changes of clothes, my photo album, my Bible, a scarf my mother gave me the year before she passed, and the pension card that had suddenly become the object of someone else's entitlement. The neighbors across the street pretended not to notice. Or maybe they really didn't. Rain has a way of muffling drama, turning it into something private. I dragged the bags down the steps one at a time and loaded them into the trunk of my car. It was my car, still in my name, paid for in cash 6 years ago. One of the few things that hadn't been turned into ours or the household's over the past year. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, not turning on the engine. Not because I didn't know where to go. I did. My friend Ruthie had told me years ago, "If things ever go sideways, you come to me. No questions, no judgments." But even with a plan, you still have to sit there and let the moment catch up to you. Let it settle on your shoulders. Let it sting. I remember staring at the windshield wipers, watching the rain bead and streak. I thought of the casserole I'd left in the fridge. I thought of the twins' drawings on the fridge door. I thought of how Janine used to climb into my bed after a nightmare when she was little and whisper, "Don't tell Daddy I cried." I started the car. By the time I reached Ruthie's, the rain had turned to mist. She lived just 15 minutes away, but I took the long route. I needed the drive. The slow stretch of road where I used to walk with my husband on Sunday evenings. The gas station where I once got locked out of my own car and a teenage clerk offered to call my son, before realizing I didn't have the number memorized anymore. Ruthie opened the door before I even knocked. She'd seen my headlights. She took one look at me and said, "So, it's happened." I nodded. She didn't ask what. She just pulled me into a hug and said, "Tea or whiskey?" I took the tea. I always do. That night, as I sat in her warm kitchen, wrapped in a blanket with the smell of peppermint in the air, I finally allowed myself to feel it all. The betrayal, the loneliness, but also something else. A strange, steady flame of clarity. For the first time in a long while, I saw the truth. Not the version I'd been trying to convince myself of, but the plain, sharp-edged truth. Janine didn't defend me. Kurt felt entitled to my money, and I had been living like a guest in my own life. That was the night something in me changed. Not suddenly, not like a bolt of lightning, but like a hinge, slow and final. A door closing. Another one, somewhere, creaking open. Grief doesn't always arrive with a scream. Sometimes it comes in quiet, methodical waves. Folding laundry you no longer need. Sorting through drawers full of someone else's toothpaste. Noticing the silence in a room where children used to laugh. That's how it was after James died. He passed on a Tuesday morning, just before breakfast. Heart stopped. Just like that. 1 minute, he was sitting at the table, reading the sports page, and the next, he wasn't. I remember the spoon clinking in his coffee mug. I remember his hand twitching once, like his body couldn't quite accept what was happening. And I remember the sound I made. Not a cry, not a scream. More like a long exhale that didn't end. I was 59 then. We'd been married 38 years. 2 kids, 1 mortgage, 1 pension, a modest life, and 1,000 tiny inside jokes no one else knew. Janine was already married the first time. The divorce happened quickly, with little ceremony. She showed up at my door with a duffel bag and 2-year-old Chloe, asking if she could stay, just for a week or 2. I said of course. We cleared out the guest room. The week turned into 3 months. It didn't bother me. I liked having the sound of footsteps in the house again, and I adored Chloe, her bright eyes, her crooked little teeth, the way she clung to my knees when she was tired. She reminded me of Janine as a child, back when I was still allowed to soothe her. Janine got back on her feet eventually, found work at a design firm, started seeing someone new. I babysat whenever she asked, cooked when she was too tired, stayed up late ironing her clothes when she had an early meeting. I didn't mind. I told myself it was temporary, just a phase. Then came Kurt. He was charming, I'll admit that. The kind of man who remembers your birthday and brings supermarket flowers, who compliments your roast chicken even if it's dry. He made Janine laugh, and that, after what she'd been through, felt like a gift. So I ignored the little things. How he always changed the subject when it turned serious. How he never offered to help clear the table. How he once asked while pouring himself a drink, "So how much is your house worth these days, Helen?" I told myself I was overreacting, that I was looking for flaws because I didn't want to lose my daughter to someone else's orbit. But there's a certain intuition that comes with age, an ability to feel when someone is watching you, not with care, but with calculation. Still, I said nothing. I smiled. I handed Chloe to him without hesitation when he offered to take her to the park. I said thank you when he fixed the dripping faucet, though James had done it better. And when they moved into a bigger place and asked if I'd consider selling the old house to help with the down payment, I said yes. Not because I trusted Kurt, but because I trusted Janine, or wanted to. The new house was bright, open, modern. Too many white surfaces, if you asked me. They insisted I keep a key. "Your family," Janine said. At first I visited only occasionally, then weekly. Then, somehow, the visits became longer. Overnight stays turned into full weeks when Janine traveled. "The kids love having you here," she said. After I tripped on the back steps of my own rented unit and tore a ligament in my ankle, the offer came fast. "Why don't you just move in with us for a while? You shouldn't be alone with that leg. It's not safe." I resisted. I had a life, limited though it was, my own space, my own rhythm. But Janine insisted, and I wanted to believe she meant it. I moved into the upstairs bedroom, the one with the sloped ceiling and a view of the neighbor's pool. At first, it felt temporary. Just a few weeks until my leg healed. Then a few more weeks. Then somehow, my mail started arriving at their address. My pension went to their shared account, just to simplify things. My things were slowly boxed up, stored in the garage to make more room for the kids. I didn't complain, not even when Kurt joked at dinner. "You should pay rent, Helen. You eat more than all of us combined." I laughed, because it seemed safer than asking whether he meant it. Janine worked long hours. Kurt, less so. He'd had jobs, real estate, then some online venture, then nothing for a while. He spent his days half watching sports, half scrolling his phone. The kids adored him. He was fun, spontaneous, the opposite of me. And so, more and more, I became invisible. When Chloe turned 11, she stopped knocking on my door at night. When Danny started school, he barely noticed whether I packed his lunch or not. I told myself this was how things were supposed to go. Grandmothers were meant to fade into the wallpaper, offer wisdom when asked, and step aside when not. But I wasn't wallpaper. Not yet. And I had not spent 30 years saving pennies in coffee cans to be told I owed rent on a house I didn't own. I had not held my daughter through divorce and childbirth just to be discarded like a misplaced lamp. Looking back, I see how gradual it all was. 1,000 little surrenders, 1,000 tiny shifts, until, finally, the sentence that changed everything. "We're short on rent. Give us your pension or leave." And I said no. It wasn't the first time Kurt had brought up money, but it was the first time he'd said it like that. Like I was a liability, an invoice, something overdue. The months leading up to that moment had been filled with a kind of erosion. You don't always notice erosion when it's happening. It's just a crack in the plaster, a missing cup from the cupboard, a sigh too long from someone across the table. But eventually, something collapses. After I moved in, things were gentle for a while. Janine made room for me in the kitchen drawers. The children left notes on my pillow. "Love you, Grandma," scribbled in bold marker. Kurt was polite, even gracious. He joked about 3 adults under one roof, but he smiled when he said it. At first. Then his job ended. At first, it was temporary. The company's shifting directions. Then it was freelance. Then consulting. Then eventually, nothing. He spent his days at home, always in the living room, always with a drink too early in the day. And the mood in the house shifted with him. Janine picked up more hours. She started snapping. At the kids. At me. I offered to help more. Take over dinner. Pick up the kids from school. Even wash Kurt's laundry when the hamper overflowed. I thought I was easing things, supporting the family. But that's the thing about support. When it becomes invisible, it stops being valued. I started noticing how Kurt looked at me when I walked into the room. Not with resentment, but with something sharper. Calculation. Like he was measuring me against some invisible debt ledger. Like he was keeping score. The first hint came when I overheard him on the phone. He was pacing in the kitchen, didn't realize I was nearby. "She gets a pension," Of course she does. Full state benefits. She doesn't even pay rent. That last part stuck, the way he said it, like I was freeloading. I mentioned it to Janine later, gently. We were folding laundry, and I said, "Kurt seems a little tense lately." She didn't look up, just kept folding. "We're all tense, Mom. It's been a hard year." "I know," I said. "If there's anything I can do—" "You're already helping," she said quickly, a little too quickly. "Don't worry about Kurt. He carries stress badly." I should have pushed, but I didn't. Then came the bill envelopes left on the table, almost deliberately, where I could see them. Rent due, electricity, internet, groceries. They weren't addressed to me, but they were placed like invitations. One evening, Kurt sat beside me on the porch with a beer in hand. It was dusk. The kids were inside. Janine was working late. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "You ever think about what it costs to run this place?" I didn't answer at first. "I mean," he went on, "you're here all the time, using water, electricity, internet, it adds up." "I cook, I clean, I watch the kids," I said carefully. "Sure," he nodded, "but that's not rent." And there it was. I told Janine the next morning. Her reaction was quiet. Too quiet. "He's under pressure," she said. "He's worried about money. We both are." "I understand," I said. "But I don't owe rent. I'm your mother, not a tenant." Her face didn't change. But she didn't defend me either. Not really. And after that, it escalated. Suddenly, the thermostat became an issue. "Helen, it's not your place to set it to 75. It's expensive." The groceries I bought were unnecessary. The milk I drank was for the kids. I noticed my pension card missing from my wallet once. Found it in the kitchen drawer. No one knew how it got there. One morning, Janine left a spreadsheet on the counter. "Just so you understand what we're dealing with," she said. It detailed their monthly expenses. Rent, utilities, food, insurance. I noticed a line that read, "Household contribution, TBD." TBD. To be determined. It was clear what they wanted. Still, I didn't confront them. I wanted to believe this was just desperation talking, a phase, a rough patch. Then, during one of those tense dinners where no one spoke unless it was to pass the salt, Kurt set his fork down and looked at me. "Look, Helen, we're short on rent, and you live here. We need your pension this month. All of it." He didn't blink. I looked at Janine. She didn't look at me. She didn't say anything. I could feel my face go cold. Not from rage, from disappointment. A kind of grief that's deeper than anger. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "But no." That was the last real conversation we had. The next morning, things were colder, tighter. Janine barely spoke. Kurt slammed drawers. The kids were sent upstairs more quickly than usual. And then, that afternoon, I came home from picking up a prescription, and my bags were packed by the front door. 2 suitcases, my umbrella, my folded cane. I knocked. No answer. The porch light was already off. The upstairs bedroom had been Chloe's once, before she outgrew the unicorn wallpaper and moved downstairs. When I moved in, I tried to make it mine. A few framed photos, my own pillow, a knitted blanket I'd made after James passed, the one with uneven corners because I'd cried through half of it. But it never stopped feeling like borrowed space. The kind of room someone gives you while insisting, "Stay as long as you need," but always with a silent expiration date. When I first arrived, after the fall that fractured my ankle, they were generous. Janine cleared the bookshelf, made space in the closet, even brought me a little nightstand lamp. Kurt carried my suitcase upstairs and joked, "Don't worry, Helen. We'll let you out when your sentence is over." I laughed, even though the comment stung more than I let on. They said it was temporary, just until I healed. "We're a family," Janine reminded me. "Families take care of each other." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. At first, I kept out of the way. I cooked breakfast early before anyone else was up. I tidied the living room, folded laundry no one asked me to fold. I walked Chloe to the bus stop, bandaged Danny's skinned knee, made dinners. No one asked me to, not in words. But the silence of appreciation can be its own kind of expectation. Then one morning, I came downstairs to find Kurt already in the kitchen, his expression sharp. "Hey, Helen," he said without looking up from his phone. "Would you mind picking up the kids today? Janine's stuck at work, and I've got stuff." He didn't say, "Please." He didn't ask if I had plans. He just assumed I was available, as if my life were a blank calendar waiting for other people to write on. I agreed. Of course I did. And I kept agreeing. Trips to the grocery store, dry cleaning pickups, last-minute babysitting. Then came the first utility bill handed to me with a smile and a "mind helping out this month." It was phrased like a favor, like a small thing. And I was still under their roof, still not fully healed, still grateful. So I helped, once, then twice. Then it stopped being a question. "You've got your pension," Kurt reminded me one evening, gesturing to the bill on the table. "It's not like you're paying rent anywhere else." I remember that sentence clearly, because it was the first time I truly saw how they'd started to view me. Not as a person, but as an asset. I told myself they were stressed, that things would get better. I rationalized. It's what mothers do, what grandmothers do. But the nature of the house had changed. Janine started referring to it as our space when asking me to keep the TV volume down. Kurt moved my mail into a drawer so it wouldn't clutter the counter. Danny told me one afternoon, with the casual cruelty only children can master, "Mom said you were just visiting for a while." Visiting. After 6 months. I tried to talk to Janine. I picked an afternoon when the kids were at school and Kurt was out. She was folding laundry on the couch. I stood nearby, hands nervously clasped. "I was thinking," I began, "maybe I should look for a place of my own again. It's been a while." She paused mid-fold, didn't look at me. "You don't need to do that," she said flatly. "We're fine. It's just, things are tight." "I know," I said softly. "That's why I wanted to—" "Mom, it's not about space," she interrupted. "But if you do want to help more with groceries or bills, I mean—" We wouldn't say no. It wasn't a conversation. It was a direction. From then on, the tension settled into the walls. Conversations were shorter. The kitchen wasn't mine anymore. My tea bags disappeared. Kurt took to calling me roomy with a smirk that made me wince. And my pension, that small, reliable check, became the elephant in every room. I started catching glances between them when I opened my wallet. Kurt hovering when I checked my bank balance online. One afternoon, I came back from the pharmacy and found Janine at my desk upstairs, looking through my papers. "I was just tidying," she said, not even trying to hide the file labeled retirement. I said nothing, just nodded and sat down. Something in me had begun to calcify. A stiffness in the chest, a growing awareness. This wasn't about care. This was about control. And soon, I knew, they'd stop pretending. The next shift was subtle, like most betrayals are. It wasn't one big event. It was 100 small ones, each one chipping away at the foundation of what we used to call family. It began with the groceries. One morning, I opened the fridge to find a sticky note on the milk carton. "For the kids," written in Janine's tidy print. Next to it, a separate container of yogurt, the cheap brand, with no label at all. Message received. I didn't mention it. I just started shopping separately. Bought my own carton, my own bread, my own tea. Kept them in a canvas bag in the bottom drawer of the fridge. I felt foolish doing it, like a roommate in a student dorm, not a grandmother who had raised 2 children and buried a husband. But it kept the peace. Then the kids started parroting things they'd overheard. Danny, 7, and blunt. "Mom says it's rude to use other people's things if you don't help pay." Chloe, a bit older, a bit more cautious. "Kurt said you used to have money, but now you're just staying here for free." Each time I heard something like that, I felt a tiny jolt of shame. Not because they were right, but because I hadn't stopped it sooner. The final straw with the groceries came when I found my name added to the supermarket rewards account. Kurt handed me the receipt one evening and said, "You bought stuff, right? Might as well earn points together." The list was almost entirely his: protein powder, imported beer, razor cartridges. My section totaled $11. The rest, $87, went on his tab. "Just Venmo me?" he said, tapping the receipt. "I don't use Venmo," I answered. He laughed. "Of course you don't." That night, I sat in bed, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. It was early summer. The fan hummed faintly. I felt a kind of anger I hadn't felt in years. Not hot, not explosive. Cold. Settled. Heavy. It sat behind my ribs like a stone. The next morning, Kurt announced he was applying for a business grant. Something about custom furniture design. He wanted seed money. And an investor. "You could help," he said over breakfast, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I could," I replied, not committing. "We've helped you," he added, looking over his coffee mug. "Now maybe you can help us get on our feet." Janine said nothing. She spread peanut butter on toast for Danny, humming like she wasn't hearing a thing. I changed the subject. Later I heard them arguing in their room. "She's sitting on money. She won't even consider helping. She's my mother, Kurt. You don't get to order her around." "No, but I get to ask why the hell she's living in our house rent-free while we're drowning in bills." The door slammed before I could hear the rest. That evening, Janine came into my room. She didn't sit down, just stood by the door, arms crossed, backlit by the hallway light. "Mom," she said, "I know it's been a tough time for all of us, but you do know we're struggling." "I do," I said. "And it's hard," she continued, "when someone in the house has income and isn't contributing." I looked at her for a long moment. "I've been buying groceries," I said. "Cooking, cleaning, watching the kids, picking them up, dropping them off, folding your laundry, mending their clothes, sitting with them when they're sick. What part of that isn't contributing?" She sighed. Not exasperated, just tired. "Kurt's just trying to do something for our future." "And I'm just trying to survive," I said. That was the first time I saw her flinch. After that, things got quieter. The conversations shorter, the smiles more strained. I started staying out of the kitchen when Kurt was home, took longer walks, kept to my room. But the tension didn't ease. It mounted, and it turned into a demand. One night after the kids had gone to bed, Kurt called a family meeting. Janine sat beside him. She looked exhausted. "We need to talk about expenses," he began. "We're behind on rent. And Helen," he paused, like he was choosing his words carefully. "You get money every month. Steady. More than we do. We think it's fair you start contributing more directly." "To rent," I clarified. Yes, he said. To rent. I looked at Janine. She didn't meet my eyes, and I realized they'd talked about this already. This wasn't a discussion. It was a conclusion. Kurt leaned forward. We're short. We need your pension. All of it. Just for a couple months. And if I say no? I asked quietly. His face didn't change. Then maybe this arrangement isn't working anymore. Janine still didn't speak. The silence stretched. I see, I said. And I went upstairs, packed what I could into 2 suitcases, left the rest. No one stopped me. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in bed, fully dressed, with my hands folded on my stomach and my suitcase already zipped by the door. It wasn't that I was afraid. Not exactly. It was that I finally understood something I hadn't let myself see before. They were never going to stop asking. Kurt wasn't going to wake up one day and realize he'd crossed a line. Janine wasn't going to sit beside me and say, "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have protected you." That apology wasn't coming. Not because they were monsters, but because to them this had become normal. The heat had been rising in the pot for months, and I'd sat in the water, telling myself it was just a warm bath. I thought maybe they'd forget what they said the night before. Maybe it was heat of the moment. I even hoped for it, quietly. I hoped Janine would knock in the morning, say something soft like, Kurt didn't mean it. That she'd look guilty. That she'd offer toast and tea like we used to do on weekends when Chloe was a baby, and the whole house still smelled like diapers and lotion. But no one knocked. I came downstairs around 8. The kids had already left for school. Kurt was on the couch, phone in hand, legs stretched out like a man on vacation. Janine stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window like the sky had something to say. "Morning," I said. Kurt grunted. Janine didn't answer. I made tea, sat at the small table in the corner of the kitchen, waited. If they were going to repeat the ultimatum, I wanted to hear it in daylight. Kurt spoke first. "So?" he said, eyes still on his phone. "So," I echoed. "What? You gonna help or not?" He looked up then, the way you look at a bank teller who's taking too long, not hostile, just impatient. I sipped my tea. "No," I said. Janine turned from the window. Her eyes met mine this time. They were tired. And something else. Wounded, maybe. Or embarrassed. Kurt sat up straighter. "You serious?" "Yes." "Why?" he asked, as if the question was absurd, as if he truly couldn't fathom the idea of someone choosing not to hand over their income to support his failures. "I've helped plenty," I said. "For years. I paid for Chloe's daycare when you were between jobs. I bought the car you drive. I co-signed the lease on this house. And I've been here every day since my fall, cooking, cleaning, watching your children." "That's enough," he scoffed. "You're acting like you're some saint." "No," I said quietly. "I'm acting like a person who knows the difference between help and exploitation." Janine stepped forward then, her voice low. "Mom, please don't turn this into a fight." I looked at her, really looked at her. "Where were you last night?" I asked. "While your husband was telling me to give up my pension or get out." She swallowed. "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." We stood there, all 3 of us, in a silence so thick I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock behind me. For a moment, I thought Janine might cry. She didn't. Kurt stood up. "If you're not contributing, you can't stay," he said. "Simple as that." I nodded once. "Then I'll go," I said. "Tonight." He looked surprised. Janine's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "I'll call Ruthie," I added. She has a spare room. And dignity. Don't be dramatic, Kurt said. No, I said, don't be greedy. I walked back upstairs, each step feeling heavier than the last, but not from sorrow, from finality. Something in me had closed. A door, a chapter, a season. I packed quietly. 2 suitcases. One for clothes, one for the rest. Toiletries, documents, my reading glasses, the pearl earrings James gave me on our 30th anniversary. I left the blanket I'd knitted. Let them have it. It had lived through too much now. I was almost done when I heard movement outside my door. A shadow, then retreating footsteps. No knock. I waited. Still nothing. At 5:30, I left the room. My suitcases waited by the front door. I'd moved them earlier, without a word. Neither Kurt nor Janine asked where I was going. They didn't say goodbye. But they did one thing. While I was out at the pharmacy picking up my blood pressure refill, they moved my bags outside, onto the porch. It had started to rain, a light drizzle, steady, soaking the canvas. When I returned, keys in hand, I saw them sitting there, side by side, wet and waiting. I knocked. No one came. I rang the bell. Still nothing. I stood there for a moment, watching the curtains shift slightly in the living room. Someone was there. Someone saw me. They just didn't move. So I reached for the suitcases, one in each hand, walked them slowly down the porch steps. My shoulder ached. My wrist throbbed. I didn't rush. I loaded them into the trunk of my car, wiped my glasses, looked back once, just once, at the house where my grandchildren slept, where my daughter had once asked me to stay forever, where my son-in-law had just erased me with a shrug. Then I got behind the wheel, and I drove away. It's strange. The things you think about when everything falls apart. Like how heavy a suitcase feels after only a few steps. How rainwater seeps through fabric faster than you'd expect. How a porch you once swept clean every Saturday morning can suddenly feel foreign. Like someone else's stoop. Like a hotel you were checked out of without warning. I didn't cry when I drove away. Not on that short ride to Ruthie's. I kept my eyes on the road, hands tight on the wheel, knuckles white with the grip. I told myself, 1 mile. Just get through 1 mile, and then another. Her porch light was on. She must have been watching for me. When she opened the door, she didn't say anything at first, just held out her arms. And that's when I finally let myself feel it. The release. I didn't think she'd let it happen, I whispered into Ruthie's shoulder. I thought, maybe she'd stop him. I know, honey, Ruthie said, holding me like I was a little girl again. I know. We didn't talk much that night. She brought out towels for my bags, which were damp around the zippers, and made us both tea. Chamomile. The good kind, not the cheap grocery box. I sipped it slowly, watching the steam curl around my hands. It took a full hour for my body to stop shivering. I've got the spare room ready, she said after a while. It's small, but the bed's firm and the heat works. It's perfect, I said. And it was. It didn't have framed pictures or scented candles or anything staged. But it had warmth. A blanket folded neatly at the foot of the bed. A small lamp. A sense that I was allowed to take up space. I sat on the edge of the mattress for a long time before changing clothes. My nightgown was still damp at the hem. I pulled on an old sweatshirt instead. Borrowed socks from Ruthie's drawer. They had tiny stars on them. Lying in the dark, I kept thinking, they really did it. Kurt had threatened it. But Janine, I hadn't believed she'd go along, that she'd stand silent in the living room while I stood at the door, bags in hand, shoulders wet, that she'd let her own mother knock and be ignored. But she had. And once you know what someone is capable of, you don't unknow it. The next morning, I woke early. My body was sore, but my mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. Clarity has a way of creeping in after the storm. I sat with Ruthie at the kitchen table, and while she made scrambled eggs, I began to list things in my head. My pension account. The bank login I hadn't checked in weeks, the medical records they kept in a folder back at Janine's, now inaccessible. My will. I need to get my paperwork in order, I said out loud. Ruthie nodded without asking questions. Whatever you need, I'll help. By noon, we'd driven to my bank. I sat down with a young man named Marcus, who was polite, but visibly startled when I told him I wanted to change all account authorizations. Everything? He asked. Yes, I said. Everything. No one should have access but me. I'd forgotten how simple it could be, to reclaim things. He walked me through the forms. I signed each one deliberately, reading every line. At the end, he printed a new statement for me. Is there anything else you'd like to do today? He asked. Yes, I said. I want to start a trust account for my granddaughter, not her parents, just her. Chloe, 11 years old, still sweet, still soft-eyed, still mine, in the small ways that mattered. I want to set it up in a way that protects her, I added, not something her parents can touch. Marcus nodded. We can do that. After the bank, I called a lawyer, Frances Darrow, the same woman who'd handled James's will. She still had an office downtown, still kept her receptionist on a strict calendar. Frances, I said when she picked up, it's Helen Whitmore. I need to update some documents. She didn't ask why, just said, come in tomorrow at 10. That evening, I sat in Ruthie's spare room again, this time with a notepad. I started writing everything I'd paid for in the past 3 years. Janine's car, Kurt's failed landscaping business, Chloe's tablet, Danny's orthodontist, groceries, rent, Christmas presents, their last vacation, plane tickets I'd booked using my own account. I listed them not out of bitterness, though some of it was bitter, but out of a need to remember, to see it plainly, to stop pretending it had been a shared life. I closed the notebook when I reached 27 line items, and I promised myself something. No more. No more silent giving. No more hoping they'd see my sacrifices and offer warmth in return. I had given enough. Now it was time to protect what remained. Frances greeted me at her office door with the same calm presence she'd always had. Neatly pressed slacks, soft linen blouse, silver hair pulled back into a clip that hadn't changed since the 90s. Her eyes, behind simple wire-framed glasses, were still sharp. You look well, Helen, she said, though we both knew better than to believe that completely. I sat across from her at the polished oak desk. The air smelled faintly of printer ink and the lavender lotion she always used. I need to make changes, I said. To everything. She nodded once. Power of attorney? Revoked, I said. Effective immediately. Will? Rewritten. I want my granddaughter Chloe to be the beneficiary, not Janine, not Kurt. Frances didn't blink. She simply reached for a pen and pulled a blank legal pad toward her. Trust structure? Separate account. No access for her parents. Age-restricted release. I want her to have something when she's older, when she can use it wisely. She made a note. And the house? She asked. I hesitated. Technically, it wasn't mine anymore. I'd helped with the down payment, but it was in their name, a detail I'd allowed without protest at the time. There's nothing I can claim there, I said, but I want everything else out of their reach. Frances looked up. This isn't about revenge, is it? No, I said. It's about correction. She smiled faintly. Good. We spent the next hour going through forms, designations, documents I hadn't touched in years. James had kept everything in pristine order. After he passed, I'd maintained it more out of habit than intention. Until now, it hadn't occurred to me that order could be weaponized, or that silence, too, had legal consequences. Frances folded the papers into a folder with my name embossed on it. "You'll come back next week to sign the final version, but the authorizations, those can be changed today." "Do it," I said. As I left her office, I felt lighter. Not free, not yet, but grounded. Anchored in something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. Back at Ruthie's, I sat at the kitchen table and told her everything. She didn't interrupt, just refilled my tea and nodded occasionally. "They're going to call," I said. "Eventually, when they realize what's happened." Ruthie raised an eyebrow. And? And I'm not answering. That evening, my phone began to buzz. First Janine, then Kurt, then Janine again. No voicemail, just missed calls. I turned the phone face down. They didn't know yet, but they were starting to sense it. The silence was its own message. The next morning, a knock came at the front door. It wasn't them. It was a courier. A single manila envelope addressed to me. No return address. Inside, a letter. Handwritten. "Mom, I don't know what happened. I know you're hurt. I know Kurt can be difficult. But this is a family. We're supposed to help each other. You've been part of this house, of our lives. The kids miss you. I miss you. Please call me. Janine." No apology. No acknowledgement of what she'd allowed. No mention of the bags on the porch in the rain. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Not to destroy it, not to reread it, just to put it away, where it belonged, in the past. Ruthie came into the room and sat beside me. She didn't ask what was in the envelope. Instead, she said, "Have you thought about where you'll go next?" I nodded. "I want a place of my own," I said. "Small, quiet, mine. No more shared keys. No more sloped ceiling guest rooms. No more waiting for permission to exist." She raised her teacup. "To that." We clinked cups like old friends on a porch swing, like women who had spent lifetimes bending around others and finally remembered how to stand. That night, I opened the notebook again, the one with the list. I drew a line under the last item. Then, in bold letters, I wrote, "No more asking. No more waiting. No more silence." I closed the notebook. Tomorrow, I'd find a new apartment. Tonight, I'd sleep without worry. The apartment wasn't fancy. It was a one-bedroom on the second floor of a building built sometime in the 70s, with beige carpeting that had seen better decades and kitchen cabinets that creaked when you opened them too fast. But it had windows that caught the afternoon light, and the neighbors were quiet, and there was no one waiting to tell me when I could or couldn't adjust the thermostat. It was mine. I signed the lease the same week Frances finalized the documents. The property manager, a kind woman named Letitia, gave me the keys and a folder full of rules and emergency contacts. Then she leaned in and said, almost conspiratorially, "If you want to hang up wind chimes on the balcony, I won't say a word." I laughed. I hadn't laughed like that in weeks. The move was simple. I didn't have much. Just 2 suitcases, a few boxes of books Ruthie helped me pack, the notebook, my papers, and the framed photo of James and me at the Grand Canyon. One of the last vacations we ever took. He'd been wearing a floppy hat and a shirt I hated, but he looked so pleased with himself, smiling into the sun. I placed that photo on the windowsill in my new bedroom, then stood back and looked at it for a long while. "We did okay," I whispered. "You'd have liked this place. It's quiet. No one shouts. No one demands. The first night there was odd. Not lonely, exactly. I'd been lonelier in a full house, but quiet in a way that let everything come to the surface. I sat on the floor, still surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, and made tea on a borrowed kettle. Ruthie had offered to help me settle in, but I'd told her I needed to do this part alone. As the kettle hissed, I made a list in my mind. Things I needed, things I didn't want to ask for, things I would buy slowly, on my own time. A proper bed, a reading lamp, a dish rack, a set of towels that matched, a chair for the balcony. I slept on the floor that night, on a folded blanket, and still woke with a clearer head than I'd had in months. The next day, I went to the library, got a card with my new address, sat at a public computer and filled out change of address forms, noted what still needed forwarding, looked up second-hand furniture stores. At the first store, I found a gently used armchair, the kind you sink into with arms worn smooth from someone else's elbows. It was sea green and faded and perfect. They delivered it the same day. I arranged it near the window and sat down with a notebook in my lap. Not the one with the list of sacrifices. I'd stopped opening that one. This one was new, a fresh cover, a new beginning. I titled the first page, "What Comes Next?" And I began to write. I will have dinner when I want, not when someone else tells me. I will leave dishes in the sink overnight, and no one will scold me. I will buy strawberries even if they're not on sale. I will say no when I mean no. I will never explain again why my money belongs to me. Around noon, the first message came in. Janine, Mom, I heard from the bank. I don't understand why you're cutting us off. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I powered the phone off. I hadn't blocked her. I wasn't there yet. But I needed the silence. The next message didn't come from her. It came from Chloe. Simple. Honest. Grandma, are you okay? Mom says you're mad. I miss you. My heart ached at that. Not because of guilt, but because Chloe hadn't done anything wrong. She was a child. 11, but old enough to sense tension. Old enough to notice when a voice goes silent in a home. Old enough to worry. I didn't respond immediately. I sat with her message like it was a fragile thing. Then I wrote back. I'm okay, Sweet Pea. I needed a new place to rest. I'll call you soon. That was all. Just enough. That night, I sat on my new balcony in my new chair and listened to the sounds of the building. A radio playing softly 2 floors down, someone's dog barking once, then stopping. The hum of life I didn't have to manage or fix. I sipped tea and watched the moon rise between the branches of an old oak tree across the street. No one was waiting for me. No one was watching. No one was demanding explanations. It wasn't freedom with fireworks. It was freedom in exhale. And for now, that was everything. Frances had everything ready when I arrived. The paperwork was neatly clipped into sections, each page tabbed with a colored sticker. I sat across from her once more, this time in clothes I chose deliberately. Clean lines, neutral colors, nothing borrowed, nothing apologetic. You've had a productive week, she said with a soft smile. I needed it, I replied. She walked me through each section. Revocation of power of attorney, updated healthcare proxy, a fully restructured will, the new trust account for Chloe, with clear legal language protecting it from interference. She'll get access at 25, Frances said, tapping the clause. No earlier, and only she can claim it. No parental proxy, no loopholes. I nodded. Good. We moved on to the financial protections. My pension account, now secured with new passwords and authentication layers. My name alone on the lease, the utilities, The bank statements. "You've built a clean slate," Frances said, sliding the final signature page across the desk. I signed it without hesitation, and when it was done, I sat back and let the silence of it settle in. "That's it?" I asked. "That's it," she said. "No one can touch what's yours now." I wanted to cry, but I didn't. The relief wasn't loud. It was steady, like a locked door behind me, finally sealing for good. Afterwards, I walked to the bakery down the street, bought myself a small cinnamon bun and a coffee I didn't have to share, sat by the window and let the sugar melt on my tongue. I watched people pass, young mothers pushing strollers, men in shirt sleeves eating lunch on benches, a girl with pink headphones dancing as she walked. Life, moving forward, indifferent, unaware that a woman inside was celebrating her first truly independent Thursday in decades. Back at the apartment, I began to fall into a rhythm. Morning tea at the balcony, a walk around the block, calls to Ruthie, sometimes silence, sometimes the news on low volume while I knit. I hadn't picked up my needles since James died, but now my hands itched for the repetition. I started with something simple, a scarf. The yarn was soft, pale blue. I didn't know yet who it would be for. Maybe myself. Every few days, a text from Janine. "Can we please talk? We didn't mean to hurt you." Chloe's asking questions. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't care, but because I wasn't ready. Letting her back in without change would undo everything I'd just done. Chloe wrote again. "Hi, Grandma. Mom says you moved. I hope you're safe. I love you." That one I answered. "I'm safe, sweetheart. I love you too. I'll call you soon, I promise." I meant it, but I also meant to do it on my own terms. A week passed, then two. On the 15th day in my new home, I went grocery shopping. Simple things. Bread, eggs, butter, my favorite marmalade. The clerk smiled when she handed me the receipt. I realized, as I walked out, that I'd made it through an entire shopping trip without thinking once about what Kurt would criticize or what Janine would consider wasteful. In the parking lot, I saw a mother scolding a teenager. Not cruelly, just tiredly. I thought of Janine, thought of the way she used to stand in my kitchen barefoot, stirring pasta, Chloe on her hip, Danny under the table drawing on the linoleum. She hadn't started this with cruelty. That came later. It began with stress, and I let the stress excuse the harm over and over. But not anymore. That night, I lit a candle, sat at the table, wrote a letter to Chloe, a real one, on paper, in my best cursive. "Sweetheart, I've moved into a quiet little apartment where I can breathe and think and rest. It's not far, but it's very different. No shouting, no demands. Just me and my tea and some yarn that keeps tangling. I miss you. I'm proud of you. And I want you to know that being kind doesn't mean letting people hurt you. I'll call soon. And maybe, one day, you'll come visit. Not because you're told to, but because you want to. Love always, Grandma." I sealed the letter and addressed it carefully. Then I placed it by the door. In the morning, I'd mail it, and that would be enough for now. On the third Sunday in my new place, I made soup. Nothing fancy. Just carrots, potatoes, a little onion, some dill. The kind of thing James used to call survival food, with a wink, though he always asked for seconds. I cooked it slowly, letting the scent fill the kitchen, move through the little hallway, seep under the bedroom door like something warm returning. While it simmered, I put on an old record. The needle scratched softly, and then Etta James sang like she knew exactly what it meant to start over at 73. I didn't dance, not quite. but I let myself sway a little as I folded the dish towel. My feet moved. That was enough. It wasn't just the soup or the music. It was the silence that held me. Not the hollow kind I'd lived with at Janine's house, the kind filled with judgment and tension. This was real silence. Soft, earned, a quiet that welcomed me. Later that afternoon, Ruthie called. "You up for a walk?" she asked. "I've got shortbread and a thermos full of tea." "I'll be there in 20, I said. Her street was 3 blocks down, a slight incline that made my knees grumble but not protest. I took my time. The wind was brisk, but the sun was kind. I passed 2 couples, a woman walking a corgi, a boy on a scooter who gave me a wide berth without needing to be told. I'd forgotten how polite the world could be when no one was watching to criticize it. Ruthie had a little bench in her front garden. She'd put out cushions and a throw blanket like it was a grand occasion. "Thought we'd celebrate your first month of freedom," she said, handing me a cup. "It's not quite a month," I said. "Close enough," she grinned. We sat there, sipping, nibbling, saying little. I told her about the scarf I was knitting. She told me about the neighbor's son getting married. To a girl from Wisconsin with a laugh like a church bell. I listened. It felt good just to be near someone who expected nothing from me. At one point, Ruthie turned to me and asked, "Do you miss them?" I didn't pretend not to know who she meant. "Sometimes," I said. "Not the house, not the tension, but Janine and the kids." She nodded. "Of course." "And sometimes," I added, "I wonder if I should have spoken up earlier, not let it get so far." She gave me a look, the kind only old friends can give, the kind that says, "Don't you dare start blaming yourself now." "You did what you had to," she said. "And then, when it was too much, you did what was right." I didn't reply, just sipped my tea. Back home, I found a package by my door. No return label, just my name in Chloe's handwriting. Crooked, uneven, beautiful. Inside, a drawing. It was a house, small, with a tree and a woman on the porch. She'd written Grandma's house at the top. There was a speech bubble coming from the window. "Do you want tea?" I held it for a long time. Then I placed it on the fridge with the only magnet I owned, a ceramic strawberry I'd bought at a church fundraiser years ago. It held the paper firmly. That night, I didn't read, didn't knit. I just sat in the armchair, the one by the window, and looked at the drawing. Let it sit with me. Let it be enough. Because sometimes, enough isn't a big moment. Sometimes it's a little girl's drawing on a fridge in an apartment filled with peace. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, just as I was setting a plate of toast beside my tea. I didn't recognize the number, but something in me knew. I let it ring twice, then 3 times more, before I picked up. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then his voice. "Hi, Helen." Kurt. I hadn't heard his voice since that morning on the porch, when my suitcases were already wet and he wouldn't open the door. I felt my shoulders stiffen, but my voice stayed calm. "What do you want?" He cleared his throat. "I just thought, maybe we could talk." I waited. "I know things got tense," he said. "I wasn't at my best. I was under a lot of pressure. We both were." "I see," I said. "I just thought maybe we could fix things. I mean, Janine's been upset. Chloe, too." I let the silence hang. I'd learned the power of silence. Finally, he added, "She's been asking about you a lot. I'm not the one who locked a door on her grandmother." He didn't respond. "Kurt," I said, "I'm not interested in apologies that sound like excuses." Another pause. "Well, if you change your mind." "I won't." I hung up. It took me a minute to move. My hands were steady, but my chest felt like it had gone hollow. I stood at the window, watched the light shift on the building across the street, breathed deeply through my nose. Then I sat down and ate my toast. An hour later, the phone rang again. Chloe. I picked up before the second ring. Hi, Grandma. Hi, sweetheart. Her voice was smaller than usual, like she'd crept off somewhere quiet to call me. I got your letter. I'm glad. She was silent a moment, then asked, Can I visit you? I hesitated, not because I didn't want her. I wanted her more than anything, but I knew what that visit would mean, knew it would be followed by questions, knew it might not come clean. Do your parents know you're calling me? I asked. Not this time, she said quietly. But I told Mom I missed you. She didn't say no. That said everything. All right, I said. You can visit. But it has to be your choice, not theirs. I want to, she said immediately. Can I come this weekend? Just for a little while? I smiled, the first real smile in days. Yes, I said. I'll make apple pie, the kind with the cinnamon crust. She laughed. Can I help roll the dough? Of course. We hung up a few minutes later. I sat in my chair, looking at the drawing on the fridge. Grandma's house. A tree. A cup of tea. That night, I made a list. Fresh apples. Brown sugar whipping cream vanilla. A new apron for Chloe. Something with pockets. I went to bed early. The moonlight slipped in through the blinds. I slept with the window cracked open, even though the air was cool. I wanted the night to come in. Saturday would come soon. And this time, the knock on the door would not be one I feared. It would be the sound of love arriving, by choice. The morning of Chloe's visit, I woke before the sun. Not from nerves, from something gentler. Anticipation, maybe. The kind that moves you before the alarm, before the kettle whistles, before the city stirs. I changed the sheets in the spare corner where I'd set up a makeshift cot. Not much, just a folded mattress, soft blanket, and the extra pillow I'd bought 2 days earlier. It would do. It wasn't about the space. It was about her knowing she was welcome. I baked the crusts first. 2, just in case. The house smelled of cinnamon and butter by 9 a.m., and I opened the window to let it stretch into the morning air. Letitia, the building manager, passed by on her way to the office and smiled up at me from the sidewalk. Someone's baking love, she called. I waved back. At 10:45, I heard feet on the stairs, light ones. Then the knock. I opened the door, and there she was. Chloe, 11 and growing taller by the minute, hair tucked behind one ear, wearing a sweatshirt too big for her. Her backpack looked heavier than her frame. Behind her, Janine stood a few steps down, arms folded, not coming closer. Hi, Chloe said. I opened the door wide. Come in, sweetheart. She stepped past me, glancing around quickly. It's small, she said. It is, I said. But it's mine. She smiled. Janine didn't come in, just called, I'll pick her up at 5. I nodded, then closed the door. We stood for a second, just looking at each other. Do you want tea? I asked. She grinned. You really do say that all the time. We sat at the small table, 2 mugs between us, steam curling. I didn't rush her. Let her eyes wander the room, notice the photo of James on the sill, the fridge with her drawing still pinned by the strawberry magnet, the knitting basket under the window. Did you really knit all that? She asked, pointing to the half-finished scarf. I did. It's slower than it used to be. It's pretty. We talked about school, about how Danny had taken her spot on the couch, about how the dog next door barked every morning at 6. She told me she hated math this year, but liked her teacher's earrings. Then she got quiet. Mom's sad a lot, she said. Since you left. I nodded. She says you just walked out. I took a deep breath. I didn't walk out. I was pushed out. Gently, maybe, but pushed. She nodded slowly. I kind of thought that. I reached for her hand across the table. She let me hold it. You don't have to take sides, I said. You just have to know that no one gets to treat people like things, not even family. She blinked. That's what it felt like they were using you. I squeezed her fingers. That's why I left. After a moment, she whispered, I'm glad you did. I stood then and walked to the counter. Now, I said, let's make pie. She rolled the dough with careful hands, tongue poking out between her teeth the way Janine used to do when she was little. She sliced apples without fear, mixed sugar and spice with a precision that surprised me. When we placed the pie in the oven, she flopped into the chair dramatically. Baking is hard, she declared. Only the first 100 times. We ate lunch on the balcony, sandwiches, a few grapes, and 2 slices of the still warm pie. She said it was better than the store kind. I didn't argue. At 4:45, her phone buzzed. Mom's outside, she said. She stood slowly, reluctant. At the door, she turned back and hugged me tightly. I want to come again, she said into my sweater. You always can. As she walked down the stairs, she turned one last time and waved. I waved back. When the door closed, the quiet returned. But this time, it was the good kind. The kind that meant something had been healed, if only a little. A week passed after Chloe's visit. Then another. The pie plate sat in the drying rack for 3 days before I finally put it away. Not because I forgot, because I wanted it there, visible. A reminder that something sweet had happened, that it could happen again. The apartment settled back into its quiet rhythm. Morning tea, reading by the window, a new knitting project, this time a blanket, pale green and slow going. I'd chosen the color without thinking. It wasn't until the second skein that I realized it matched the sweater Chloe had worn the day she visited. Her texts came every few days now. Short ones. Math test, B+. Grandma magic? Mom says hi. I told her to write it herself. Can I come back next Saturday? I always answered. Always yes. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, the letter came. No envelope. Just a folded sheet of paper slid under my door while I was out shopping. I found it when I came in, bag still in hand, the paper half shadowed on the floor like it didn't want to be seen. I recognized the handwriting before I even touched it. Janine. I sat at the table before unfolding it. Made tea. Let it steep too long. I wanted to be ready. It wasn't long, not emotional, but it was. Something. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about what I let happen. I don't expect you to forgive it. I don't know if I would, if I were you. But I miss you. I miss the way the house used to feel when you were in it. The kids miss you too. Kurt says nothing, but I see it in the way he doesn't touch the thermostat anymore. Chloe came home glowing after the visit. She keeps the pie recipe in her school binder. I know I didn't stop things when I should have. I know I stood by. I don't know how to fix that, but I wanted you to know I see it now. Jay. I read it once, then again. The letter didn't ask for anything. No requests, no invitations. Just a statement. A beginning. I folded it carefully and placed it next to Chloe's drawing on the fridge. It wasn't absolution, but it was the first honest thing I'd heard from Janine in a long time. Later that evening, I sat on the balcony, blanket over my knees, and watched the sun sink behind the apartments across the street. The wind moved gently through the leaves. My tea had gone cold. but I didn't mind. I thought about what it meant to forgive, not to forget, not to excuse, but to choose peace for myself, to unclench the part of me that had been holding its breath since the day I packed my suitcases. I didn't know if I was ready to write back, but I knew one thing. I wasn't angry anymore, and maybe that was enough for now. The second time Chloe visited, she brought a plastic bag full of cookies she'd made herself. "They're kind of hard," she said, holding the bag out like it was precious cargo. "Danny said they tasted like soap, but he also ate 5. We sat at the table and bit into one together. It was indeed hard, and a little soapy, but I smiled and said, 'He's clearly just jealous.' She grinned wide. That gap in her top row of teeth still hadn't closed. She stayed longer this time. We didn't bake. We didn't need to. We just sat. She asked about the scarf I was knitting, told me about a friend at school who wore purple eyeshadow and didn't care what anyone said. I told her I admired that kind of girl. Chloe nodded. "I think I'm going to be like that." "You already are," I said. When Janine came to pick her up, she didn't stay on the stairs this time. She walked all the way up, stood at my door with her arms folded, not defensive, but unsure. I opened it before she could knock. "Hi," she said. "Hi." She glanced inside, saw Chloe gathering her things, then looked back at me. "I meant what I wrote," she said, "and I'm sorry for all of it." I nodded. "I know." She hesitated, then said, "If you ever want to come by just to visit, the kids would like that." "I'll think about it," I said. And I meant that. I wasn't promising, but I wasn't slamming a door either. Chloe hugged me twice at the threshold. Janine didn't push for more. They walked down the stairs together, and I watched them disappear around the corner before I closed the door. I leaned against it for a long moment. Not out of grief, out of calm. That night, I pulled out my old notebook, the one with the long list of things I'd done for them. I read each line slowly. The payments, the favors, the meals, the nights, the silence. And then I tore the page out, folded it in half, then again, then once more, until it was small enough to hold in my palm. I stood over the trash bin, dropped it in, and watched it settle on top of an eggshell and a used tea bag. Gone. Later, I sat at the table and wrote a new page. Not a list, just one line. I am still here, and I have enough. Because I did. I wasn't rich. My knees ached on damp mornings. I lived above a laundromat that rattled every Thursday afternoon. But I had a place of my own. I had Ruthie. I had a granddaughter who knew I deserved more. I had a name that no one could speak with pity anymore. And I had quiet. Not emptiness. Not exile. Just quiet. To anyone reading this, if you've ever been asked to shrink yourself for someone else's comfort, I want to tell you something. You don't owe them your silence. You don't owe them your pension. You don't owe them a seat at the table where they never served you a plate. Stand up. Even if it's slow. Even if your hands shake. Even if it's raining and your bags are wet. Stand up. Because the first step away from being used is the first step toward being free. And freedom, I've learned, doesn't always look like a revolution. Sometimes it looks like a cup of tea on your own balcony, a warm pie cooling on a borrowed rack, a girl knocking on your door not because she has to, but because she wants to. Sometimes freedom looks like you, just being. And that, at last, is enough.